Good. Okay. Well, very warm greetings, everyone. Thank you for being here live. And thank you to all those who will be watching the recording as well. So it's my really great pleasure and honor to welcome a special guest today, Dr. Michelle McMurry-Heath. And just a few words from me about Michelle. We actually met originally about, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, when Michelle became a coaching client of mine. And she was in very senior leadership and navigating challenging terrains. And we did about 2 years coaching together. And it was an extraordinary journey for me and a really privileged journey for me to be able to experience the landscapes, the inner landscapes that Michelle was moving through, personal, ancestral, and collective. And we then made a very, very natural transition to being friends. And that's been at least 2 or 3 years. And during that time, we've met quite regularly because we just have fantastic conversations together, which are really real inquiries. We open topics and we inquire together in the best possible way and really get a lot of inspiration, often actually very moved as well. So that's what we're intending to do today. And let me just read you a little bit about Michelle. So Michelle McMurry-Heath is a physician scientist who has spent her career focused on health policy and health innovation strategy. Her work centers on improving our understanding of medical breakthroughs and our access to the best therapies with the goal of improving health for all people. She has held leadership roles in the US Food and Drug Administration, Johnson & Johnson, the Aspen Institute, and was most recently president and CEO of BIO, a coalition of biotech companies. In her leadership, she has sought to bring kindness and openness to governmental, nonprofit, and industry teams. I would add, she has brought an extraordinary brilliance as well. She's very modest. So welcome, Michelle. Welcome. I'm going to spotlight us both now.
And
Okay.
the eternal attempt to get off of mute. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know,
Yeah.
coming from all over the
Good
world.
evening. Yeah. So, Michelle, welcome. Welcome. It's lovely to be here with you. And I thought I'd begin with, I know we're both deeply inspired by leaders such as Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Mandela. And I've been particularly inspired recently by some famous words by Martin Luther King. And we've already talked about them in some depth. But I thought this would be a good starting point for us. So let me read the quote. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And this seems to me to be more extraordinarily relevant now than at any other time in many ways. So maybe if we just start, and just so everyone knows, we haven't planned very much. We planned kind of topics we'll touch into, but there's no fixed structure in our dialogue. So let's start maybe by just how does that land in you now, Michelle? Should you want me to read it again?
Before you read it again, I just have to take a moment to just say a word about Nicholas. What an extraordinary and timely vision and insight that he brings to leadership right now. I think we need it more than ever in the eternal sense of a good friend. He always pushes my thinking, and leads me to expand how I embrace the world and those I love and those I work to love. So thank you so much for that, Nicholas, and thank
Mm,
you for having me here today.
thank you.
It's a pleasure to join you.
Thank you. So, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that.
I think it is such a challenging statement to hear right now.
Mhm.
And I think we are all being pushed, whether it's economically, personally, politically, globally, to dig in our heels, to defend our ground,
Mhm.
to stand up for ourselves, um, to speak louder than everyone else in the room. And somehow the game board has been shifted to imply that those are the only tools and approaches that will work and that are available.
Mm, mm,
And that quote reminds us not only are they not the only tools and approaches, but they're the least effective tools and approaches. And that is so hard to even believe where we sit right now, um, let alone have faith in. And I do think faith is the important word in that sentence,
mm,
because it's going to take faith to remember, because I'll say we all know it at some point, but to remember that love and light are more powerful than hate and darkness.
mm. Right, right, absolutely. And for me, as we've also explored many times, the question is, what does it take for us to
Mm,
really, probably most of us would absolutely align with that statement because, as you say, we know that even if when we get triggered into the opposite. So the question really arises of what does it take inside?
mm,
It brings a question of resilience. It brings a question of what does it mean to access
yes,
power, real power,
real
because we have
power.
so many examples in the world, everywhere, all around the world, of a particular type of power, which is actually often very destructive and leads easily to us feeling powerless in the face of that. So
Yes.
I feel there's a huge call for us all to discover inside what are deeper sources of power.
Mm,
I know you've spoken to me at times in a way that has really deeply touched me about, in your lineage, how power was accessed in spite of all the things that were happening.
mm.
What are your sort
Yeah,
of feelings now about how do we really access a deeper inner power, which is close to
mm.
love as well?
It's so interesting because we had this conversation. Well, you opened by saying we don't have a lot of prepared remarks, but that's very different because than saying we didn't prepare. We did a lot of preparation, and in
Right.
some of our preparatory conversations, we talked about the fear and the sense that now is a time to be silent or to be silenced.
Yes.
And it is hard at times like this for me personally to feel the difference between feeling silenced and getting quiet.
Wow. Okay. Beautiful.
They're distinct, right?
Very.
One is really coming from a sense of fear and what will
Mm,
be the retribution. And I think people are feeling that no matter where you sit in the world, no matter what organization in which you work, there's a sense right now that speech is can be dangerous.
Mm.
And yet, in order to access that faith and the courage to overcome that fear, we do need to get quiet.
Mm.
We do need to get out of the repartee that is constant and almost increasing in frequency and amplitude
Right.
all around us. So that is one part of it. But then we've had some very interesting conversations through the years about how, in the Black American community that I was raised in, it wasn't necessarily about getting quiet. It wasn't necessarily about meditation. It
Mm.
was about deep prayer.
Right.
And it was about sitting in a community of faith and drawing on the strength of those around you.
Mm.
And I've been reflecting recently around the ritual of the Black church and how, if you think about the 50s and 60s and even the 70s, there were people who felt powerless Monday through Saturday,
Mm.
who felt denigrated and vulnerable, and at risk. And there was almost this ritual transformation that took place Sunday
Mm.
morning. I can still see my grandmother and my mother getting ready for the church day, which was, you put on your finest clothing,
Mm.
you put together your entire family, and everyone came and sat in the pews in a show of strength almost. And yet there was also a bit of surrender to it. I mean, when you were moved with the spirit, you surrendered that facade as well. So it wasn't about appearances, it was about showing that you had personal dignity, strength, and power, and that was strengthened by the personal dignity, strength, and power of the people around you, shoulder to shoulder in those pews.
Mm.
Um, and I think we need to find a way to tap either that quiet, meditative, sit in the cave, um, spiritual strength, or that sometimes loud and boisterous community of faith, sitting on the mountaintop, as we've had the conversation, right? Type of strength as well. Both of those are pillars of strength that are undermined currently, and we need to access one or both if we're going to remember that we need to bring light to the situation, and we need to love those even who may hate us.
Mm. Yes, indeed. Actually, I hear you talking about kind of three pillars. So if I would just say how I understood what you said. So the first pillar is the accessing our own inner sovereignty, let's call it, our own inner dignity.
Mm.
And in all of these
Dignity.
three pillars, there's one common thing, which is that we're detaching from the worldview out there. We're separate.
Mm.
That's very important. It's like we're seeing the lie and the incoherence and distortion of the system out there. And we're saying, okay, first of all, let me find where is the source of my inner dignity, my inner sovereignty? That's powerful. We can maybe elaborate on that. Then secondly, you're talking about the community that comes together. And I think many of us are talking now about the urgent need for, let's call it conscious community, groups of people who are seeing the lie of what's out there, for want of a better word, and saying there is another possibility in consciousness. And the more we do that together, the more that strengthens, for sure. It's not a solo journey anymore. And then there's a third, which you mentioned and then didn't quite include in the two, because it's difficult to include it. And I've often spoken about this, because the third is the contact with spirit, whatever we want to call it. And I think it was in my last talk or the one before where I spoke about that one of the great deficiencies of our modern age, in some ways the greatest, is the secular ceiling. That, we become so absorbed by the scientific materialist version of reality as mechanistic. And we threw out religion for good reasons, dogma, beliefs, all of that. But we also threw the baby out with the bathwater. And what I hear about when you speak of the Black Church is a very pure kind of surrendered spirit. And interestingly, people, you see, in the secular version of reality, people think that when they do that, they give up their power. It's fascinating. You talk about devotion and surrender, and people say, no, 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 I'm sovereign, I. So it's this extraordinary mixture of the second or the first, find my sovereignty, and then also surrender, devote myself to a higher principle, whatever we call that. Doesn't matter what we. But I hear that it was vividly experienced in the Black Church. Vividly.
So many things come to mind as you are speaking. Um, First of all, you highlighting dignity and how hard it is to hold on to dignity, and how dignity finding your own personal dignity and believing in that takes a denial of what you hear from the world around you. I think in the Black community, there's a lot of conversation about how our personal sense of dignity is distinct from what we're told it should be. But I don't think that's unique to Black Americans or people of color or people who find themselves in the minority and wherever they live in the world. I think it's true of every individual in the world that our dignity and our power is much more than the world around us tells us it is.
Right.
We were talking about this quote I ran across from James Baldwin that was saying, in Black America, they tell us that we're weak, and yet they rely on us to do labor. They tell us that we're dirty, and they rely on us to clean their homes. They tell us we're uncivilized, and yet they rely on us to raise their children. This was a quote from the 60s, so we're in a different moment in history today, but that dissonance between what the outer world proclaims you to be and yet the undercurrent of actually what they recognize you to be is something I think that's an important dissonance for every person, regardless of their cultural background, to tap into and
Absolutely.
to try to come up with their own answer of what is your worth, what is your dignity, what is your power. And then the question you raised about is surrender weakness is, I think, one of the most important questions of the age. And maybe it's the ages because I don't think it's ever changed. Been doing deep reading about Gandhi and King recently, and Gandhi had this theory around soul force, and Martin Luther King called it the power of unearned suffering. So things that you suffer that are not your fault, I guess, is kind of a more shallow way to rephrase it. But this idea that if you can surrender to the unjust, there's a power from that. It takes courage, it takes strength, it takes power, and it will help you identify that dignity dissonance that I think is key to a straight spine
Wow.
in the current world.
Yes. And of course, that, first of all, I think that really takes community, because it also, when there is what you call unearned suffering, it's very easy to go into feeling like a victim. And the whole, and it can be justified, and well, look what's happening to us, look what's being done to us. But that in itself is a abnegation of the possibility of our inner power.
Mm.
So to build, first of all, I mean, it's a very fine line, that, because it is natural to feel like a victim if things are being done to you. But that's where I always remember an extraordinary story I once read about a Tibetan monk who'd been imprisoned and tortured by the Chinese for 10 years. And he was interviewed after he was released, and he said, there were times when I was in great danger. And the interviewer said, do you mean for your life? And he said, no, no, no. There were times when I was in danger of losing my compassion for the Chinese.
Mm.
I mean, that points to an extraordinary level of inner dignity and being
Mm.
bigger than the circumstances, which is a huge challenge for all of us. And that's exactly where I think we need community. We need community. And we also, as you well know, because we did so much together, and we still do together when we need, that there's a whole level of emotional work we have to do, that we can't bypass the suffering. We have to find the way to include the suffering in the broadest sense, the terror, the anger. And we have to build the possibility together where we fully feel and include that in order that it transmutes. And in order that what we call darkness actually becomes light when we do that.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that
Mm-hmm.
so many times working, even when someone says they feel really powerless or they feel despair. And rather than try and find the way out of that, we make a space where let's just feel that together. Let's have no opposition,
Mm.
really no opposition to that. And when that is safe enough to occur, there is almost always a movement actually into love, because love and unity are very, very close. When he said, hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Love and unity, I believe, are very, very closely linked. So when we have a lack of unity inside, when we polarize with anything inside, we're not going to be in unity and not going to be in love. So this is also a big calling. That is the journey upwards, let's say, into faith and into connection with whatever we might think of as a higher principle or the intelligence of life. There's an equally important movement to embrace inside ourselves what we call dark. Despair, powerless. Oh, I don't want to feel that. But sometimes it's through actually allowing that fully and being met in that it really transmutes inside. And then the collective, because we know now that we experience the collective of that as well. My father was a Holocaust trauma affected person, and he never ever dealt with it. So little by little, I began to see how that was sitting in me. And until I had a safe enough space to process it, and it will never be fully finished, it was sitting as frozen energy in me, limiting my experience of life. And we did amazing work together with that part of your lineage. And I remember you telling me your grandmother wouldn't sit with her back to the door of a restaurant. I've never forgotten that, Michelle.
Mm.
I mean, that implies a level of inner terror that's there on a
Yeah.
daily basis. And she most probably didn't have the possibility to really process that. And so it gets passed down.
Well, it's interesting. So to give a little bit of context to that, so my grandmother was part of the Great Migration from the southern United States to the Northeast and the West. She went to California. Um, but she remembered aunts and uncles disappearing overnight in Louisiana. One because he was rumored to have made a pass at a white woman, not an uncommon uh, charge in the day. And he was told he had to leave town overnight, and he disappeared and lost touch with his family. Um, One because they decided to go north and pass and cut off all ties with their family, their pre-existing family. So that was the reason she didn't sit with her back to doors in restaurants, because she remembered people getting snatched. Um, and I do think dealing with your family's history of fear
Mm,
um, is a very important part. And I think it's only become infinitely more complex now that we're dealing with a proliferation of present day terror.
right.
Um, and if you haven't been touched by terror in the last 5 to 10 years, then you've at least been touched by the chaos,
Mm,
um, which brings its own level of fear and uncertainty. So now you have even a bigger task, Nicholas, to lead us through processing those ancestral layers of unrecognized fear and terror while we're real time
mm,
processing the things we're afraid of today.
yes.
And I hope I'm not overstating the case, but I think there's so many pockets of places around the world that even if you personally haven't been touched by
Mm,
something you're afraid of today, you're hearing about it more, you're seeing it more, it's there.
right. I don't think you're overstating it at all. I mean, every organization I come into contact with, every leader I come into contact with is carrying anxiety. Let's start with anxiety. And very
Mm,
often, because that's how we are programmed to be, are doing a lot in order not to
mm,
feel that, because it's somehow considered weak, or this is our whole distortion, as we know, around emotion, that if I allow myself to feel fear, I'll be paralyzed by it. But actually the opposite is true. We're paralyzed by freezing the fear. Once we feel the fear, there's a lot of life force released. So I
mm,
don't think you're overstating. And I see a lot of organizations more or less in panic mode, actually, because the world is structures are falling apart all over the place, and there's so much instability. And organizations are more or less in panic mode because using the old tools as well, like we have to analyze our way through this, is really more and more being shown to be inadequate. We're needing a much bigger intelligence. I sometimes call it whole self intelligence, part of which involves where you started with, I need to know how to go quiet and
mm.
to know how to listen to what's happening in a much deeper way than only thinking about it.
And maybe a big part of that is even the courage to call it fear. I mean, as you were speaking just now and talking about organizational panic, I was thinking, well, how do I hear it described? I hear it described as uncertainty,
That's right.
that the stock market is going up and down because of uncertainty. Well, what
How,
we're calling uncertainty is really fear,
how do you feel
right?
of uncertainty. Almost all of us feel fear.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I had a colleague say to me the other day, we were checking in on former team members and colleagues inside the federal government. And I said, how are you feeling this is the US federal government. How do you feel the morale is? And he said, well, whenever I talk to someone, they say, today I'm okay. I don't know about tomorrow, but today I'm okay. And that's another expression of that fear.
Yes.
And if we can't even call it fear,
Yeah, exactly.
we're not close to processing it. So maybe that's an important part of it too. But it's also it's I feel like we're afraid to even approach it because we think it's this huge iceberg and underneath it's going to swallow us whole.
Right. That's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah. But actually naming it minimizes it or shrinks it. I won't say minimizes it, but shrinks it. And then we can start to see our power in it as well, our resilience through it, our communal sense of it, and our strength through that community. Um, and all of those are important tools that we sometimes leave on the table.
Absolutely. And it's just coming into my mind something you said earlier. I forgot to mention it at the time when you said that going quiet, like in church, it's actually can be very loud. But there are many, many spiritual traditions where chanting is a crucial part of the process.
Mm,
And our very
planting seed.
mutual friend Shola, who will be a guest later in the year, Shola Akingbola, is starting an amazing project researching the power of sound and vibration in communities who are displaced, and how sound and the vibration of sound helps them come back home inside. So it's definitely not about only sitting like that.
Hmm. Hmm. And song, song being such a powerful thing. I
Yes.
mean, one of the themes in this, in one of the books I'm reading on Martin Luther King right now, was the importance of singing spirituals during the protests as a way to deal with the fear that they were walking into face. And the difference between how our different religions, traditions use sound or ignore sound. But I think it's really important.
And
And singing together is very powerful.
the singing during the labor,
Hmm. Hmm.
which could easily
Hmm.
become an intolerable activity.
It is. And we've we've disassociated, we've disconnected from each other from those types of abilities. I sometimes even wonder what happens with conversational vibrations that we used to feel in the same room that we now hear through our AirPods, what right through Zoom, right? So it's an interesting conversation. It's not my area of expertise, but it's something I feel really to be important.
It is absolutely, and the language we use for our relating, like in many
Mhm.
cultures that are less rationalized, it's very common that someone speaks and then says, "Do you feel me?
Mm,
Not do you understand me? Do you feel me?"
mhm,
I would say,
mhm,
I feel
mhm,
that we're very, very far away from because we're very disembodied. This big part of my work, as you know, that when we
mhm,
operate up here, we don't feel anything. So I definitely don't feel you. And it doesn't
mhm.
really matter to me if you feel me because I don't feel myself. So why would I feel me?
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, this could be a portal time,
Yeah,
a
I
time
believe it
for
is.
us to start to recognize that we need song and community. We need to feel each other in conversation. We need to be afraid and process it.
Mm,
Um,
exactly. Exactly.
yeah.
In a way where I was just literally a moment ago was thinking when you were speaking, in a way we're really talking about coming home.
Mm,
Like I find myself often saying, we've forgotten how much we are in exile.
mm,
I think it's a very deep word, that, and we really need to hear the echo of that word. We are by and large in exile, and we've normalized that. And yet, if we look around, we deeply crave coming out of exile, and we look for the ways we can, but often we look in the wrong way. We're looking for experiences or status or all of those things that we think will give us a feeling of more being at home inside. But the being at home is an inner journey of union inside and of connection with each other, heart connection with each other. And sometimes that means being very, very vulnerable with each other. I'm going to share with you how I'm really hurting right now, really hurting. And hopefully you're going to not try and fix me. You're going to just say, no, I'm here. I feel you. I really feel.
mm, mhm,
That's when that kind of experience happens, we both come closer to home. We both come closer to home. And, it's so paradoxical how we talk all the time about connectivity. And as I say in my book, we've actually never been more disconnected, starting inside from our bodies. And I know, for instance, you did a whole, I don't know how you did it while you were CEO, but you did a whole training, yoga teacher training. So you also know you've gone through an amazing journey of really connecting with your body.
mm,
The wisdom,
yeah.
the wisdom that's in the body. And I hear many very wise people, particularly women, talking about when they really have a difficult decision to make, they go right down into their body, right into the core of the body, even into the womb. That's where wisdom arises. And our whole culture, again, is very, very disconnected from that.
I think it's important, and it's interesting that we talk a lot about trauma as something we need to get past,
Mm,
something we need to process. But there's something I think we're experiencing right now on a societal and individual level, that trauma is also very necessary.
mm,
And I say that because I was thinking about that process of going down into the body, connecting. Almost all of those things happened after loss,
yeah.
after your ability to attach yourself to the external markers of dignity get stripped away,
Mm,
um, voluntarily or involuntarily, right?
right.
Um, and it's often only after those sorts of losses and traumas that we do first surrender
Mm,
and discover the power in that surrender. And it's
yes.
it's it's wonderful to be the type of person who just voluntarily goes inside, walks away from it all, learns the power of surrender without anything traumatic happening to them.
Right.
Those individuals are rare.
Rare.
And so we talk a lot about what we need to get over with trauma, but maybe this is a time for us to talk about the gift embedded inside of trauma,
Mm,
inside of loss.
right.
Um,
Wow. Yeah, I mean, in a way, what I hear you talking about is being brought to our knees,
oof,
because that's where some of the egoic identity just doesn't hold anymore. And the egoic identity is fundamentally what keeps us separate. And it's very true that actually, even if you look at someone like Eckhart Tolle, whose story is that he was in deep, deep, deep depression.
Same with Jung, same with Carl Jung.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we look at people like MLK and Gandhi and Mandela, the so-called dark they went through inside. And by journeying with that, the expansion that at some point occurred. And that's why I often say in my work now, I don't think we've talked about this, but I often find myself saying this is not a wellness project.
Mm.
Because a wellness project is where we seek to make our egoic identity feel better.
Mm.
Transformational project is where we're really interested in opening as fully as we can, which will mean being brought to our knees, probably multiple times,
Multiple times.
where we actually, because in the egoic identity and the wellness project, we're basically, as far as I can see, we're always trying to stay in control or
Mm.
fantasy of control. So I meditate a bit, I do physical workout, and it was like the CEO. We obviously can't say who it is, but you mentioned the CEO of a huge pharma company to me once who was addicted to being happy. You know what we can't say who it is, and that he projected all the time. I'm happy, and on one level, people liked it until you then told me the only problem was no one could ever bring him any bad news. I was like, wow, okay, that's great leadership, my friend.
That's what you're taught
That's
to
the way.
do as as a CEO. You're supposed to show that everything rolls off your back, that you don't
Okay,
get upset by anything, that you have this, we call it resilience, that you have this ability to convey confidence to the troops when you don't feel it yourself, right? That's
yeah,
our leadership.
okay, because I want us to,
But you're right, but you're right.
but I want to spend the last part of our time talking about leadership, Michelle.
Mhm.
You know, you've been in very senior positions and you've navigated very challenging territory. And you're having a pause now. You're between points in your career. So I know you're reflecting deeply now about leadership. So let's take in the last part of our time. What are the fundamental demands now of leadership? What are the deepest inner aspects of what a leader needs right now? How does she or he need to be inside? I mean, I'm throwing out different ways of looking at it. Why don't you start and then let's dialogue about that.
Uh, I'll start between the difference between what I was taught and what I feel spiritually drawn to. So, what I
Yeah,
was taught was to not get emotional other than joy, to to show that you can take tough criticism, never get upset. Oh, and taking criticism is important, right?
of course.
Um, but it's this whole idea that you can take the hard knocks and instantly bounce back, which I think has a kernel of truth and importance to it, but also misses something very key.
Yes.
And what I've been drawn to, and the reason I've been delving into Gandhi and MLK
Mm,
biographies recently is I remember once years ago where I had to come up with a list of 10 leaders, it might have even been for you, that I really respected.
mm,
And Gandhi and MLK were on that list. So I've been recently trying to understand what would they have done today?
mm.
How would they be responding to our current environment? I don't have the answer to it, but I'm trying to get to it. And I think it's important for us all to think about what are the leadership examples that we resonate with, and then ask ourselves the question, what would they be doing today?
Beautiful.
And one of the things that was the, 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 the factors I've been able to identify is one, be very clear about the cause you're living for that's bigger than yourself. The
Mm,
cause you would actually be willing to lose everything or die for.
right. Wow.
Two, deciding what's most important in living for that goal.
Mm,
We call it goals now. They called it causes then. I think it's the same thing. Um, and three, live that in every instance that you can, which is not the same as live it in every instance, because even Gandhi and MLK, they were full of personal failures,
of
many
course.
of which they would admit themselves, right? But their objective was to live as coherently with that objective as they could, even when they failed. I'm
Yes.
missing a lot of other elements, and maybe when you open it up to questions, people have their own thoughts, but I think that's incredibly hard to do today.
Mm,
We have so prized convenience and timeliness
mm,
that, I'm struggling even with well, I won't get into politics, but even the things that are being asked today at the protest level are so convenience based.
mm,
Don't shop here, don't buy this,
mm,
choose that brand.
right. Right.
Those are more about convenience than sacrifice.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Well, that's very profound, Michelle. And it
Yeah.
comes back in a way, it kind of comes circling back to one of the ways we started about we have to see the lie of what we've normalized. We have to look at how we've been hypnotized into it and are all the time, and our works in progress in terms of dissolving that. And when you speak of sacrifice, I mean, that has so many levels of meaning. And I know you went to the MLK Museum recently because you're doing a project there. Um, would you say just a little bit about like what you experienced at the end there? And then maybe we can just watch the clip that we've recently often watched together when we've met,
Yeah.
been so moved by, because it's
So
the
if
surrender and sacrifice in a way.
yeah, if you haven't heard of this museum, and I hadn't heard of it until recently, it's the National Civil Rights Museum, which is at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. The the balcony of which was the place where King was shot. And so the museum is constructed around the place of his death. And yet it's one of the most uplifting, um, powerful museum exhibits I think I've ever seen. I don't know how they managed to bring so much light to a place that people associate with so much darkness, right? To get to our original point. But you kind of walk your way through the history, and the whole museum tour ends in the room of the motel where King was shot. You don't even realize that's where you're going because of the way they've constructed the space, but you're walking through 300 years of history and you end up in this motel room, which is behind a glass. And to a person, you're in tears. Like you feel the power of the space.
Mm,
And they had this exhibit saying that he was actually on the balcony moments before the shots were fired, speaking to a saxophonist who was in the parking lot, asking him to play Precious Lord, which was his favorite song, right before the shots rang out. And it is worth a trip to Memphis to see this museum. You should walk the halls. It is powerful. And you definitely get the sense that there's something energetic about that place, that space. But I think it's also, you also feel the light, even though it was a place of such a dark event. You feel the light in a weird way. And you feel the sacrifice.
Right.
And I think, and it's interesting, whenever they discuss someone who died during that time period in American history, they say this person was martyred and this person was martyred. They don't say murdered, they don't say killed, they say this person was martyred, meaning each and every sacrifice, the ones we don't learn about in our history books, was an important brick in the wall and very meaningful. And I think we have to, it's time for us to ask ourselves, what are we willing to sacrifice? And most of us only know that today through maybe our children. That might be the only vector in our life that we feel a place, a sense that we would sacrifice. But maybe it's time for us to start thinking about what our children will inherit. And I feel that for people who are biological parents and not biological parents, having spent many years having our daughter, I know that you have that sense of obligation, whether or not you've born a child yourself. But I think it's very important for us to start thinking in those terms. It's a critical moment in history.
Wow, thank you. And am I right in saying that that particular gospel song that was playing, that the actual words of it are "Take my hand, precious Lord," which is
it's often played at funerals. It's about bringing people home to spirit and home after death. And as we've discussed, his speech that he gave right before then, which was unplanned because he was sick, he had planned to cancel the night before he was killed. He had planned to cancel, and the crowd was so large and so enthusiastic that his team actually came back and said, "You have to go, Martin, even though you're not feeling well, you have to go. They want to see you." And it was prophetic. And I think maybe that's that last element of leadership, which is maybe not prophecy, but at least it's vision for where you see the future going. And I think that's a very important piece too.
Yes. I mean, I've watched it many times and I'm going to play it now for everyone. It's vision, and what comes to me now is that it's also a kind of certainty. Completely different kind of certainty. And there's something that's part of the force of it. And the fact that he says, as we'll see, I have seen what's going to happen. We will get to the promised land, but I may not be with you. I mean, that sends chills because it's also like a part of him knew what was about to happen. Let's watch that. Is it okay that I'm it's like 2 minutes, the last part of his mountaintop, it's called a mountaintop speech, the day before he was shot. Okay, I have to change the, yeah. Here we are.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Brings tears to your eyes every time.
Every time. Mm.
Yeah. I think we all just need to hold on to that courage and try to claim a piece of it for ourselves right now.
Yes. Yeah. I'm just going to see what people are writing. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle, you are an embodiment of dignity. Thank you. Thanks so much for giving us your time.
Of course, thank you for having me. But I'm wanting to read all the chats. There's so much
Yes.
to look through.
I found myself through embracing my trauma. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone, so much for your time as well. We'll say goodbye for now. Thank you.